At my own wedding, in front of friends, family, and people I hadn't seen in years, my stepmother leaned in toward my aunt, barely bothering to lower her voice, and said, "She's just pretending to be loved." I heard it. Every word landed like a slap. Before I could process what she meant, my father laughed, actually laughed, and added, "She's lucky he even showed up." I felt my stomach twist. I was standing just a few feet away, waiting for the cake to be brought out, when their words hit me square in the chest. It was like I had been shoved underwater in a room full of people. The lights were warm, the music was soft, guests were smiling, but all I could hear was that sentence replaying in my mind. "She's just pretending to be loved." He laughed. He said, "I was lucky Oliver even showed up." That was my father, the man who once used to carry me on his shoulders, who told me bedtime stories when I was small, who kissed my forehead after I lost my first tooth. But after my mom passed and he married Janice, something in him hardened. Or maybe it just changed direction. Either way, I wasn't his priority anymore. I was a loose end from a different life. For years, I tried to earn his approval again. I stayed out of trouble, got good grades, smiled when Janice made little remarks at dinner, kept my mouth shut when her daughter Collie got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. I told myself he'd notice eventually. He never did. But on that day, my wedding day, I had let myself believe just for once that things could feel whole, that maybe surrounded by celebration and vows and white lace, my family could show up for me like I'd always dreamed they would. Instead, I stood in my white dress holding a glass of champagne and heard my stepmother reduce my relationship to a performance. I watched my father mock my value like I was a joke. I wanted to disappear. Then something happened. Oliver, my husband, my safe place, must have seen my face fall. I didn't even know he was paying attention at that moment. But he walked up to the mic. There was no announcement, no signal, just the sound of him clearing his throat and a hush falling over the room. Everyone turned, froze. He looked directly at my father and Janice, calm, clear, eyes steady. And then he said, "I'm marrying her for this one reason." The room fell silent. You could feel it like the wind got knocked out of the entire building. My breath caught in my throat. No one expected what came next. But what Oliver said in the next few seconds didn't just change the mood. It changed everything. And I'll never forget the look on their faces. The morning of my wedding started like a dream. The kind of soft golden-lit dream you think only happens in movies or someone else's life. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me, pinning curls, adjusting straps, laughing about how I wouldn't eat anything but strawberries all morning because I was too nervous to chew. But underneath all of it, under the silk robe, the lip gloss, the fake lashes, I was holding my breath. Not because I doubted marrying Oliver. That part, that love, was the only thing I was completely sure of. It was the other part. The part I'd been pretending not to think about for weeks. My family. Janice was there, of course, stepmother of the year in her champagne-colored gown that she insisted was beige, not too close to white, even though we both knew better. She walked in like she owned the room, complimented the decor like she was inspecting a hotel lobby, and took over my makeup chair before I could sit down. She gave me a kiss on the cheek, light, cold, performative, and said, "Let's hope you don't cry too much during the vows. Waterproof mascara can only do so much. No, I'm proud of you." No hug, no warmth, just her usual subtle digs, wrapped in sugar and delivered with a smile. My dad came in an hour later. He didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't really say anything at all, just glanced around the room, gave me a nod, and said, "Well, you look ready." Ready? Not beautiful, not radiant, just ready. Like I was walking into a job interview. Not the biggest moment of my life. He'd been like that for years now, distant, flat. Sometimes I wondered if he even remembered what I looked like as a child, when I used to race down the hallway just to be the first one to hug him after work. That man disappeared when my mother died. I think we both disappeared a little after that. Losing my mom was the first time I understood that grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just makes people quieter. I was 13, I remember the smell of her clothes when we packed them away. I remember her humming in the kitchen while stirring pasta. And I remember how within a year, Janice had moved in with her own daughter, Collie, and my dad had started over without me. From the moment Janice arrived, I became invisible. Not to everyone, just to the one person who should have made me feel safe. She never said anything cruel in public, but her words were always sharp and private. And my dad never stepped in. He let it happen. He let me shrink. So on my wedding day, when I stood in front of the mirror in my dress, I tried to hold on to the one thing that felt true. Oliver, he saw me. Always had. We met 3 years ago at a volunteer event for foster youth. I was there to help run a writing workshop. He was organizing supplies for the art table. We barely spoke until lunch when he sat down across from me and said, "You look like someone who believes in lost causes." I laughed. He smiled like he'd been waiting for me to do that. And I knew right then that something important had just happened. Oliver never made me feel like I had to earn his affection. He listened. He showed up. He knew when I was spiraling and when I just needed silence. He gave me space but never left me alone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to audition for love. That's what made the rest of the day so painful. I thought I had finally built something strong enough to stand in front of my family with pride. I thought maybe my dad would look at me and see someone worth rooting for. That maybe, just maybe, Janice would at least pretend to be happy for me. But even as the ceremony began, even as I walked down the aisle, locking eyes with the men who had made me feel chosen every single day, I could feel Janice's gaze on me like a weight. I could sense the tightness in my father's posture, like he couldn't relax even here. Still, I smiled. I said my vows. I let myself believe the worst was behind me. I had no idea what was waiting at the reception, but I would soon. And when it came, it didn't just hurt. It cracked something open I'd been holding shut for years. The ceremony had been beautiful, simple, intimate. We wrote our own vows, and Oliver got choked up halfway through his voice cracked when he said, "You're the calm in every storm I didn't know I was weathering." I couldn't even get through mine without crying. For a few perfect hours, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the weight I carried didn't matter. Everyone clapped, the music played, and we walked back up the aisle, like something out of a photo album you'd want to show your future kids. But the magic faded faster than I expected. At the reception, the tables were glowing with candles and little cards I'd handwrote for every guest. Everyone told me it felt warm, welcoming, like a hug of a wedding. I tried to stay in that bubble, surrounded by laughter, glasses clinking, and the occasional happy tear from Oliver's side of the family. But there was a shadow following me through the entire evening. And her name was Janice. She sat at the head table, of course, front and center, just beside my dad, legs crossed, drink in hand, her posture perfect, her expressions tightly controlled, like she was a guest of honor instead of a barely tolerated obligation. Every time I looked over, she was scanning the room, like she was measuring whether or not she approved. I tried to ignore it. I danced with Oliver's nieces, hugged old friends, thanked guests for coming. But during one of those brief quiet moments, when the caterers were bringing out the cake and the MC was prepping the mic, I stood a few steps behind our table, catching my breath. That's when I heard her. Janice. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She leaned in toward my Aunt Marlene, one of the few people from my mom's side who had shown up, and said very clearly, "She's just pretending to be loved. It's all for show." Like I was some prop in my own wedding. Like Oliver and I had staged the entire thing for attention, as if love, real love, couldn't possibly belong to someone like me. And then my dad, my own father, laughed, not an awkward chuckle, full amused snort like he'd been holding it in all night. "She's lucky he even showed up," he said, shaking his head. "He'll realize soon enough." Didn't even realize I was holding my glass tighter until I heard the crack. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. I felt everything inside me freeze. My heart started pounding and suddenly the room didn't feel warm anymore. It felt suffocating, loud, bright, blurred, like I'd been pulled underwater in the middle of my own celebration. I turned away before they could see the tears welling up. I forced a smile at the photographer who passed by, murmured something about needing air, and walked outside for a moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there still trying to breathe. My entire life I had been shrinking to make room for them, for Janice's jabs, for my father's silence. I had done everything I could to keep the peace, to avoid being the problem child, to just survive until I could leave. But now I was a grown woman, a wife, and it still wasn't enough. I wanted to go back inside and pretend I hadn't heard it. I wanted to smile through the cake cutting, push through the speeches, and get through the night without ruining anything. That was always my role. Don't ruin anything. Then I saw Oliver through the window. He was laughing with one of my cousins, completely unaware of what had just happened. And something about that moment, about knowing that he had shown up fully, that he had chosen me without hesitation, broke something open in me. Not in a way that made me weak, but in a way that made me realize I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I wasn't going to walk back into that room and act like everything was fine, because it wasn't. And I was done being the quiet one. As I opened the door to go back inside, I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know Oliver had heard enough to sense something was wrong. I didn't know he'd already made a decision of his own. But something had shifted in both of us. And that moment was the beginning of everything that came next. When I stepped back into the reception hall, the air felt different. Or maybe I did. I wiped under my eyes carefully, making sure no tears smudged my makeup. I smiled at the photographer. I waved at a cousin across the room. No one knew that everything inside me was unraveling. No one but Oliver. He caught my eyes the second I returned to the head table. He was mid-conversation with his brother but paused, his brow furrowed. He scanned my face like a puzzle he was determined to solve. I could feel the question behind his eyes. What happened? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I forced another smile, reached for my water, and sat down. The next phase of the night was about to start. The speeches. Our MC tapped the microphone and announced, "If anyone would like to share a few words for the bride and groom, now's your chance." People clapped. A few stood up and made sweet, funny, sentimental speeches. Oliver's aunt shared a memory of him as a kid organizing neighborhood movie nights. My friend Kira told a story about how I once left work early to help her pick up her dog from surgery. There were light moments, kind moments, ones you usually hear at a wedding, but I couldn't hear any of it. I kept thinking about Janice's voice, about my dad laughing. They were sitting 2 seats away, completely composed, as if they hadn't just gutted me. Janice had that signature satisfied smile she wore whenever she felt like she'd won something. My dad stared blankly at his wine glass, nodding here and there. I couldn't believe they could be so cruel and so calm. And then Oliver stood up. No warning, no signal, just stood. I grabbed his wrist instinctively. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head gently. "Trust me." That's all he said. Then he walked to the mic. The room quieted immediately. People expected something romantic or funny. A toast maybe, but he wasn't holding a glass. He wasn't smiling. He looked calm, yes, but something in his shoulders, something in his eyes felt heavier. He took a breath, then looked directly at Janice, at my father. "I wasn't planning to say anything," he began, "but tonight, something's been weighing on me, and I can't sit with it in silence." My heart dropped. I wanted to disappear. I knew where this was going. I also knew there was no stopping him. Oliver turned slightly toward the crowd, but his eyes still lingered on them. "I didn't fall in love with Era because she's perfect," he said. "I didn't choose her because she's easy or convenient. I chose her because she's real. She's resilient. She carries more pain than most people could handle and still leads with kindness. I've seen her walk through rooms full of people who dismissed her and still find a way to love them." He paused. "She doesn't just pretend to be loved. She's loved fiercely by me, by her friends, by everyone who really knows her." You could feel the ripple moving through the room. "And I didn't show up today because I'm doing her a favor. I showed up because this is the best decision I'll ever make. Because I get to spend my life with someone who fights every single day to be better than the people who tried to break her." He looked directly at my father. Then I watched as the blood drained from Dad's face. Just a little. "I'm proud to marry, not in spite of where she came from, but because of it. Because she still loves in a world that hasn't always loved her back." There was silence. No clapping, just stunned stillness. Then Oliver walked back over, eyes locked on mine. He sat beside me and took my hand. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, heart wide open, trying to hold the weight of everything he had just done. Janice didn't say another word for the rest of the night. My father didn't even look at me. But Oliver, he didn't let go of my hand for 1 second. That moment was the shift, not just in the evening, but in me, because for the first time in my life, someone didn't just stand beside me quietly. He stood up for me. I don't know if anyone actually applauded after Oliver sat down. I don't remember hearing anything at all. It was like the entire room had gone into a collective silence. Not out of discomfort, but because something sacred had just happened and everyone knew it. I kept staring at him. He didn't look smug. He wasn't looking around for approval or checking Janice's expression or my dad's reaction. He was just still steady, like he had said exactly what he needed to say. And that was enough. And for me, it was more than enough. It was the moment I stopped feeling like I had to shrink. The moment I realized I had married a man who would rather disrupt an entire wedding reception than let me sit with someone else's shame on my shoulders. I glanced across the table. Janice's face was tight. Her jaw clenched just slightly, but she didn't speak. Her glass of white wine was untouched for the first time that evening. Her eyes flicked from person to person, reading the room like she was trying to calculate whether anyone was still on her side. She didn't find much. And my father, he didn't even lift his eyes. He sat there staring into nothing, lips pressed together like a man who finally realized that silence speaks loudest when it's broken by someone else. That should have felt like justice. But honestly, it just felt sad. Sad that he had a daughter and never really saw her. Sad that I had spent years trying to earn something he never intended to give. And even now on my wedding day, he wasn't angry or defensive. He was just absent again. I turned back to Oliver. He reached up and brushed a hair from my cheek and whispered, "Okay." I nodded barely, but it wasn't just okay. It was everything. After that, something in the room lightened. Maybe because the tension had been sliced open, or maybe because people suddenly realized who this day was really about. One by one, guests came up to us. Not to Janice, not to my father, but to us. Oliver's cousins hugged me. My old high school teacher told me, "He's a good man, but you're the reason this room feels like love." My friend Maya whispered, "You're not pretending. You're the most loved person in here." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The rest of the reception felt different. The music felt louder, freer. The laughter wasn't tight anymore. It wasn't polite. It was joyful. Like people had been holding something back and now they didn't have to. Oliver and I danced, really danced. Not just the slow swaying kind of dance couples do when everyone's watching. We spun and laughed and stumbled and kissed between lyrics like no one else was in the room. That freedom, that fullness, I'd never felt it before. Later, when it was time for the cake, the MC asked if anyone else had a final toast. Janice started to rise. I watched her, unsure what she was about to say. Maybe something petty, maybe something fake and graceful. But she stopped, looked at my dad, then sat back down without saying a word. That silence, that was my peace offering. The cake was cut. My best friend caught the bouquet. The flower girl fell asleep on her mom's lap after one too many cookies. It became the wedding I had dreamed of. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It had heart and honesty and people who saw me clearly finally. But the real moment, the one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, didn't come during a dance or a speech. It came in the parking lot after we'd said goodbye to the last few guests. I was standing barefoot on the concrete, holding my heels in one hand and the hem of my dress in the other. Oliver opened the passenger door for me, then paused and said, "You okay? Really?" I looked up at the man I just married, the man who took a microphone and shattered years of silence, and I smiled fully, deeply, like I never had before. "I am now," I said, and I meant it. In the days after the wedding, everything slowed down. The flowers wilted. The rented chairs were returned. The photos started trickling in from guests' phones. People called to say how beautiful the ceremony was, how touching Oliver's words had been. But underneath all the thank you notes and leftover cake, Something bigger had shifted. Me. I wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle, secretly hoping her father might finally say something kind. I wasn't the same woman who had spent most of her life trying to earn a place at her own family's table. And I wasn't pretending anymore. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the shame they had handed me. After the wedding, I didn't hear much from my father. He didn't call. No text. No message. Not even a congrats when we got back from the honeymoon. Janice unsurprisingly went quiet too. Her last act was silence. Maybe because she didn't know how to spin the fact that her cruelty had finally been called out in front of a room full of people. But you know what surprised me? I didn't miss them. That aching need for their approval, the one that had followed me for decades, was gone. Like it had finally expired. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. I started therapy again, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I had stayed in that cycle for so long. Why I had let their words shape my worth. Why I thought love had to be earned through endurance instead of simply received. I learned that boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. That family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up for you when it matters. And most importantly, I learned that being loved truly, deeply, without conditions, isn't something you have to beg for. It's something you choose to accept when you stop settling for less. Oliver and I moved into a small house with creaky stairs and too many bookshelves. We hosted game nights, cooked messy dinners, stayed up too late watching bad movies and good documentaries. We didn't talk much about the wedding after the first week, not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't need to relive it to understand what it meant. But one night, a few months later, as we were sitting on the porch watching a summer storm roll in, Oliver said something I'll never forget. "You know, I didn't stand up that night to defend you," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I stood up because I knew you didn't need defending. You just needed someone to remind the room of who you are." That hit me in the chest because he was right. Somewhere inside me, I had always known who I was. I just kept waiting for someone to say it out loud so I could believe it too. Now, I didn't need them to. Not Janice, not my father, not anyone. Because I had finally said it to myself. I am enough. I am worthy. I am loved deeply, fully, and without condition. And if someone can't see that, it says nothing about my value and everything about their limits. So to anyone listening, anyone who's ever sat quietly while their worth was questioned, who's ever been told they were hard to love or too much or not enough, hear this. You are not the opinion of people to broken to understand your light. You are not a project to be fixed or a role to be performed. You are not pretending. And you don't have to wait for a wedding or a microphone or a dramatic moment to realize it. You only need one thing to stop shrinking. That day didn't go how I imagined. It wasn't the perfect glossy fairy tale, but it was honest. It was healing. It was mine. And I wouldn't change a single moment because that was the day I stopped waiting to be loved and started standing in the love that was already mine. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or underestimated, just know you're not alone. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. And if you're still waiting for that moment, I hope this gave you the courage to stop waiting and start believing in your own worth. If you found meaning in this story, please take a second to like the video. It helps so much. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know who's silently carrying the same pain. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you would have said if you had the mic. And if you want more real, raw, and honest stories like this one, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here. And more than anything, thank you for listening.